Well, yeah, I think Baba has presented my paper better than I probably would have. So I want to thank you for that summary. And thank you for your newspaper.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Mutiny, Gada.
Mutiny, Gada. Now, I want to just really highlight one or two things. The one of them is that very often we are taught to think about our histories in particular ways. And very often in the post-colonial world, our stories of our struggles have become the stories of the rise of a particular political party and the great Messiah, the Moses who led the party, the father of the nation. And there's truth in that certain parties often predominated at Uhuru, at independence. But we often lose sight in this of the role of the ordinary mass of the people in crumbling down systems like colonialism, imperialism. We often lose sight of the role of ordinary people in shaping the world. If we see all of our struggles as really delivered from on high by Jomo Kenyatta, Nelson Mandela, we can take our pick. I'm not going to say Mengistu. I think it's a bit more controversial. But if we see it that way, we lose sight that the motor of history is ordinary people's struggles. This is what takes us forward. This is the big engine room of history. Ordinary people's struggles, their willingness, their bravery, their ability to stand up and say, basta, nothing more. Now, Makhan Singh is part of that history, and he's part of that history of ordinary people shaping the world. And I think this is where Zarina Patel has done an incredible work in recovering the life of this man. A man from a minority community, the Asian community in East Africa, a man whose father actually became a small businessman, and a man who nonetheless dedicated his entire life to the struggle of ordinary people. And when I say dedicated that, it was partly around trade unionism, but there's a very important thing to highlight there. First, his trade unionism was non-racial, and by that I mean that he actively, explicitly organized both Asians and black Africans into the same trade unions, and he fought for equality of conditions between them. So to overcome divide and rule in the colonial situation, what he said was, we need an equal wage for equal pay. Now, we face that often with gender. He raised it around race. The Asian worker did not benefit from the fact that black people were treated worse. This, in fact, was used as a club by the colonialists and by the capitalists against all workers, the existence of a very cheap black labor force. Secondly, he was quite clear that a lot of the root of cheap labor lay in the colonial system. So besides being non-racial, his trade unionism was also one which understood that the trade union struggle cannot just stop at the wage negotiation, because the wage negotiation is itself embedded in a larger social context. The wage level, as I said yesterday, is not simply a product of objective forces of supply and demand. I don't agree with that. Wage levels are fundamentally determined by the balance of power in society. And particular organizations of society, particular ways that capitalism is expressed, create particular conditions. So in a colonial context like Kenya under the British, cheap black wages could not be distinguished from the fact that Kenya was a colony in which black people were treated as black people worse. And this created a gulf in the working class between the Asians and the black Africans, and this benefited the upper class. So a union, he's really making the point that a union has to be political. Has to be political. Now, this does not mean a union has to be under a political party. The one organization that influenced him, the Industrial Workers of the World, the IWW, which was set up in the United States in 1905, the IWW, which wrote the song Solidarity Forever, which we sung yesterday, the IWW, which spread from the United States into Canada, it spread from the United States into Mexico, into Chile, into Japan, into South Africa, which influenced the ICU of Southern Africa. If any Malawians here, the ICU of Clemens Gaddafi, the one big union idea. These unions stressed, we don't want to be subordinated to a political party, but we will be political. We will take all of those fights through the union. We refuse the argument that unions are simply about selling wages, about selling workers at a better rate. A union has to be political because workers' lives don't stop at the factory, and the factory is not an island, it is shaped by the larger world. You talk about your situation in Kenya. The fact of the matter is a lot of your wage situation is affected by attracting foreign direct investment. And Kenya lacks capital, therefore it tries to attract foreign capital, and to do that, its main advantage is cheap labor. So your state, your government will push for cheap labor, and until your unions are strong, it will deliver cheap labor. It will sell your cheap labor over to foreign and local capitalists. Now, the other thing I wanted to point out, and this is the thing about anti-colonial struggles, is all of our struggles have got multiple potentials. History does not go in one direction. We look back and it seems we had to come where we are. We look back and we think everything I did was preordained, like a destiny, like predestination. If there are any good Calvinists here, you know what I mean, predestination. But I think the point is there is a degree of choice, of free will that we have in society and in history. And in the anti-colonial struggles, what the Gadar party, the mutiny party of Indians, argued was that decolonization should not mean replacing a white elite with a brown elite or a black elite. It should not mean replacing a white elite with a local elite. It should mean replacing, tearing down, changing the whole system of power in which a few people are at the beck and call of other people. We might not call them slaves, we can call them wage slaves. I like that phrase. The difference is a slave was bought permanently, a wage slave has to sell himself or herself every day. And whereas the slave of the past was bought by the master, was chosen by the master, as wage slaves we have to choose our master. We have to say, please buy me. That's a very deep structure in society that has to change. And what Gadar Party, Industrial Workers of the World, Makhan Singh, Communist Party of India were arguing is anti-colonialism does not end with Jomo Kenyatta or Mohandas Gandhi. It must end with a new society based on justice, equality, the end of race hatred, the end of blind patriotism, the end of poverty, the end of the wage system. So the fact that 50 years ago Kenya decolonized in a certain way doesn't mean it had to be that way. There were other paths that could have been taken. You can also see 50 years ago was much better than being under the British, but it wasn't enough. Same thing in South Africa 20 years on. Better, but not enough. Let's not dismiss those struggles. Let's not dismiss the fact that the British Empire was broken. That is a victory. That is an important victory. Let's not dismiss the fact that several years ago you overthrew the one-party state. Those victories matter. But that's not the same as saying if you win the round, it doesn't mean you've won the entire match. There's more struggles to be done. And your strategy in that match will shape how quickly you win or how many times you waste in different rounds getting beaten up. Okay. So in closing, I want to just mention that the Gadar Party exemplified, like the Industrial Workers of the World and like Makhan Singh himself, who was active in Kenya and in India. He was locked up both in India and in Kenya by the British. The importance of a global perspective, a global resistance. Let me take the Gadar Party as an example, the Mutiny Party. It was actually set up in the United States by Indian immigrant workers. It had branches in Hong Kong. It had branches in Malaysia, in Afghanistan, South Africa, Mexico, and very importantly in Kenya as well. And it saw its struggle as part of the global fight of the oppressed for a new and better society. It formed alliances with Irish nationalists who were fighting for independence. It formed alliances with left-wing groups like the IWW, the anarcho-syndicalists. And it understood its struggle was global. And its enemies understood that as well. When it was repressed in the United States, in India, and in Kenya. 5 Gadarites, members of the Gadar Party, were killed by the British authorities in Kenya in 1915. Now, the last point is just this. I want to pick up a point that Baba made, which is when we talk about changing society, a very important thing is how do we change it? And I think very often we think of change in society as we get a better party elected, we get a better policy enacted. The whole problem in the system is bad governance. The whole problem in the system is bad leaders. No, I think what the Gadar Party, what the Industrial Workers of the World pointed out, is the problem is that most people don't have any control over society at all. And just changing one party and replacing with another doesn't change your day-to-day life. You just change the elite. You can have Uhuru now, you could have Moi earlier, but you're still not in charge. Maybe you get beaten up less. That's good. It's important. It's not enough. So the vision of the industrial workers of the world and of sections of the God Our Party was that a new humane society had to be one in which democracy existed in all parts of life. Concretely, this would mean the flower farms would be run primarily by the farm workers, who would decide on the conditions on what should be produced. Should you be producing flowers to send to the Netherlands? Or should you be producing food? Those basic democratic decisions would have to be rolled out everywhere. So their vision wasn't the vision of one party grabbing the state and fixing things. Their vision was one which said we build the new society as we go, we build the road as we walk, but the road we follow is one in which power stays in the hands of the people, and we build outside, independently of the state, independently of the parties that participate in the state, that we aim at controlling society, but directly. Not the old days of your Mangustus who have a palace coup and it's a revolution has been announced in the morning. And you now know it's socialism. It's on the radio. No. Socialism is something which is created. Whether we call it socialism, we can debate. Thank you for your time. I'm not sure how we're doing.
I will go right ahead and give the microphone to Prof.
I'm mindful that our time is limited. So what I really want to just stress first is thank you for all the comments and feedback that have been provided. I think this has been a space and an important space for people to debate issues. And I think we must all be careful, myself included, not to assume there's a simple set of answers that we can just hammer onto reality. We have to test theory against practice. We have to see what works. I think an important part of that is to rediscover and learn from past experiences. Because very often, I think, in our movements, we act as if everything started 5 years ago, and we make the same mistakes that our forebears did. That's the one thing. It's important to look at the past. The second thing is, part of the struggle of the working class is a struggle around the economy, but it's also a struggle, and I think I said it yesterday, around dignity, the ability to make decisions, the ability to really shape where society goes. But part of this is also about history and knowledge and what we think we know. When I said that in many of our countries our history has been reduced to the history of the Kenyatas and the Mandelas, which is not to, or the Cabrals, which is not to dismiss those men, but it's to also say it's important for us to understand the role of ordinary people, trade unionists like yourselves, like Makhan Singh, ordinary people in the trenches who fought and who fight and who every day make a difference to the world. Now, in the final thing, the thing of the unions and the parties, we can debate, and I think there's a lot more that needs to be said on that issue, and so I don't want to give a simple answer. What I am saying is, I'm reflecting the views that were made by some of the structures that organized shaped Makhan Singh. I would agree that part of the problem is we have to have a bigger perspective than just pure and simple trade unionism. I mean, that I would think is very important. And I think part of the great contribution of Makhan Singh was to launch the unions. But one of his weaknesses was when he dropped the spear, there were not many people to pick it up and carry it. He didn't really build... he was a great man. He was a great man. Let's not take that away. But unless you have some sort of organization maybe beyond the union, slightly separate from the union, but not controlling the union, but at least discussion circles, places where ideas and that can be expressed. We must be very careful about building movements that rest on one or two people. When those one or two people drop the spear or cross the line to the other class, Okay, so thank you very much for this. I'd like to thank the KHRC organizers. I'd like to thank all of those who attended. I'd like to thank Zarina Patel again for organizing a Makhan Singh Memorial Lecture. And I would just leave it there. Thank you. I'm honored to have been here. I'm honored to have met you. And anyone who wants to maybe chat to me afterwards, otherwise you can Google me. I'm somewhere there. Okay, so thank you.